Good morning in Mexico and in the United States. Good afternoon in Europe. I thank you so much for being with us in this webinar. Let me thank VoiceBoxer for giving us this opportunity to share with you how to overcome language barriers in a globalized workplace. I am Gonzalo Celorio. I chair the Italia Moraita Foundation, and I'm so pleased to see you in this virtual roundtable that we are having today. First of all, I would like to ask you to participate and to invite you to use this tool, which is quite useful. Take as much advantage of it as you can. Let me remind you that this is a tool that you may use in different languages. We have an interpreter. This is Carlos. He's interpreting from Spanish into English, and you may select if you want to hear the interpretation in Spanish or in English. In the lower part, in the lower right-hand side, you can select the language that you want to listen to. Also, you can also send me your questions through the chats. You can send me your questions. You can send private chats to different people as you select in the chat channel that you would choose. And you may just click where it says chat channel right below my image. Today we have three speakers that will be speaking in the following order. We'll have Claudia Verona. She'll be the first speaker. Then we'll have Casilda Mulligan, and then we'll have Teresa Vankova. We'll follow them in alphabetical order. They will introduce themselves. I don't think that will take much time in this. I mean, we have their resumes that are quite impressive. So let me give them the floor, but let me remind you that we want you to participate through Twitter or through this chat channel. So please, we invite you to share with us all your opinions. And let me begin this presentation with two quotes that I think are very important quotes. They are talking to us about multilingualism and also how to overcome this language barrier in a globalized world. We are talking about different situations because our three speakers are now in Europe. And in Europe, one cannot cross the street, actually, without having a change of language, while in Latin America, we can go through 24 hours without changing our language. So this is one of the important things that I would like you to follow in our speakers' presentations. In this quote by Nelson Mandela, if you talk to a man in a language he understands, that goes to his head. If you talk to him in his language, that goes to his heart. When also you speak in a language you learned, you say what you can say. When you speak in your own language, you say what you want to say. This was said by Jose Miguel Insulza, the chair of the OAS. This is how multilingual communication operates within large businesses. So let me give the floor to Claudia. I thank Claudia so much for being with us today.
Very much, Gonzalo, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm excited to be here with you today and talk about multilingualism as a key skill enabling successful international communications. My name is Claudia Verona, and I structure my presentation in 3 times. First, I will talk about how I became a multilingual, then some facts about multilingualism, and then just 5 pieces of advice when managing multilingual projects. As for who I am, I'm actually an Italian native. I grew up in Italy where I lived for about the first 20 years of my life, and I was completely monolingual. So I actually grew up monolingual. And I didn't learn my second language until I was 20 and I moved to the United States. I used to play professional volleyball and I was recruited to an American university. And eventually I also moved over to San Francisco to attend Golden Gate University, spending a total of 10 years in the United States. And that's where I had the chance to learn and perfect English, which was my second language. I then moved back to Europe and I've been living in Paris for the last 15 years, where I had to actually learn French as well. That's been my third language. And I've been working for Eutelsat, which is the leading satellite operator in Europe. So a few words about my job. I'm head of market research and customer experience. So in my job, I handle a lot of global market research projects and the communications related to it. The company, Eutelsat, as I said, it's a leading satellite operator headquartered in France, but we have offices in 19 countries. It's a small company. We're 1,000 collaborators, but from 37 nationalities. So it's extremely international and multicultural in its culture. And we have clients from over 80 countries. Our 40 satellites, they carry 6,000 TV channels. I get to work actively in my three languages, Italian, French, and English every day. And it's one of the reasons why I love my job. Also, my personal life is distinguished by multilingualism. As I said, I'm an Italian native. My husband is a Belgian national. His native language is Flemish. We have two sons. And as you can see from this diagram, our family language diagrams are extremely complex. We get to use all of the four languages. And my kids, they grew up with all four of them, and they grew up perfectly quadrilingual. So it can get confusing at times, at the same time extremely enriching. So some key facts about multilingualism. As you all know, we live in a world which is more and more connected and global by definitions, and the languages are all over. There's more than 7,000 languages that are spoken in the world. And this is a list of only a handful of countries where there's two or more official languages. So where multilingualism is really a way of life for the citizens of these countries. In Europe, multilingualism is also a very much an ingrained phenomenon. 2/3 of working age Europeans, they know a foreign language, whether because of the country where they live, or just because of the lifestyle or the professional life that they have. This is a result of Schengen and of the increased mobility within the European Union. But we have peaks, for instance, in Denmark, where 94% of the population speak another language. Here in France, where I live, it's actually 66% of the population. Also, within the communications professionals, we are detecting stronger increase of multilingualism as well. There's a survey which has been run by VMA Group, which is a big recruiting communications group here in Europe, that shows how 9 out of 10 IC professionals, this is professionals that are specialized in internal communications, speak more than 2 languages even. And so when leading a multilingual profession or life, there's different factors that can influence the success of it. Here's their stand that have been taken from a very interesting book, which is quoted at the bottom of the slide. I won't go through all of them, but for instance, timing, it's extremely important. We don't learn languages in the same way, whether we are a toddler or whether we are an adult. And I can totally see the difference in my own personal experience. I learned my foreign languages as an adult. And I see my kids that have been exposed to them, from birth. They have a completely different ability and aptitude toward it. It doesn't mean that we cannot learn languages as adults, but it's just that the brain is shaped in a different way and reacts differently, and also stores the information in different parts. Aptitude also is an important factor. There is such a thing as a linguistic intelligence, and so there are some people that are more prone to learning languages than others. And also the rank within the siblings or the gender. Women seems to be more apt for language learning. So what are the 5 advices that I can share with you based on my professional experience so far? When dealing with large international projects, I, for instance, get to translate and promote my market research projects in several different markets. So the first thing is that we need to be fluent. We need to cultivate the fluency. You're all translators, and you know better than me, the brain is like a muscle, and it needs to be exercised. And we're lucky to live in this digital world in a place where there's a lot of tools that are available for free. There's apps like Duolingo, for instance. There's a lot of access that we can have to media, whether it's music, press, or movies via the internet, that helps us cultivate this fluency. The second piece of advice is to show cultural sensitivity when we're trying to bring a piece of information, a piece of content into another culture. It's not just about Google Translate very quickly. It's not just so mechanical. We need to understand also what is the cultural context and how that piece of content makes sense or not, or can be perceived. And I'll give you a concrete example of a project in which, I worked on years ago, Allstate, which is a very important and famous insurance company in the United States. They had this type of visuals that you see in the bottom of the slide associated with the core services, the house, home insurance, and life insurance. And when they wanted to, at some point, penetrate the Chinese market, they had to revise these visuals, because the house, which is supposed to represent the typical suburban house from the United States, did not really correspond to the housing, the average housing in China. The same for the typical family insurance. The visual would have the average American family with the parents and then a young child and and 2 young children had to be changed in light of the one-child policy in China. So these can be like little details that can really make or break the success of a campaign or of a service rollout. Another interesting example is also how some brands might sound different in another language. And I have the example of a British company called Skyfo, which was a phone over IP service. The brand obviously wanted to emulate the terminology Sky phone. They tried to penetrate the Italian market a couple of years ago, except that they kept the brand as it is, and in Italian it's read Schifo. Schifo in Italian means disgust, so as you can imagine, the brand was not as accepted, and it didn't really manage to introduce the service. The third piece of advice is always to beware of stereotypes, colloquialism, and humor nuances that might be really difficult to translate. Why do we have stereotypes? We set expectations based on experience and cultures. The brain needs to catalog information in order to make sense of reality, and that's why we build, all sorts of stereotypes. But this can be really dangerous when we try to translate them into another culture, into another setting. And finally, beware of acronyms. Acronyms are very tempting, and they can mean something completely different in another language. For instance, when we talk about AIDS in France, it's actually referred to as SIDA. It's actually the AIDS acronym in French. But SIDA also can be the Swedish International Development Agency. And imagine if they need to enter the French market, they would have a really hard time being understood. And last but not least, there's when in doubt, reach out to experts and always test with natives. Sometimes even without meaning well, we can end up doing damage. There's an example from about a year ago that really struck my mind of a neologism that was created in Silicon Valley during a tech conference in San Francisco, where a technology writer and the journalist came up with a neologism inculator, which was supposed to designate a business angel in between an incubator or an accelerator. However, this word in the Romance languages has strong sexual connotations of sodomy, and so you can imagine the French, Italian, and Spanish press welcomed this with a lot of irony and skepticism. So this was my little 2 cents. I really enjoyed being with you, and I look forward to hearing from my fellow co-presenters. I'd like to leave with a sentence from a Czech proverb that says, those who know many languages live as many languages as the languages they know, many lives, and I can really testify for that. So thank you very much, and I leave it off to my following presenter, Casilda.
Claudia, we thank you so much. There are points of great interest regarding the tools in order to remain fluent in your first languages, to do exercise. Not because you have ran a marathon, that means that 3 years later you can start running again unless you practiced. There are other points here. There are some questions that we have received. I will pose them to you during the Q&A session at the end of this presentation. Let me give now the floor to Casilda Mulligan. Casilda, you are welcome. All right, thank you, Gonzalo. I hope that you can hear me well, and let me thank you that you're going to provide me with the questions, because as you may see in my presentation, when I was asked to talk to you, I said, well, in 10 minutes, the only thing that I can aspire to provide you is questions more than answers. And I will leave you with this. First of all, let me introduce myself. I'm Mexican, and I am extremely pleased to talk to my country today, because this week it's been 10 years since I've lived in England. In the last 15 years, I've had the great opportunity, the blessing of working with and in many countries in the world, and to work for audiences in different languages, from European languages up to South Africa, where we actually have 13 official languages. Or, for example, I had to learn that there are differences between a traditional Chinese and modern Chinese, Mandarin. And now I work in London for one of the largest companies in the world. We have 128,000 employees. So any internal note will have an impact and accomplish its goal in such a global world. And, of course, we have just to clarify that this is, I speak for myself and not on behalf of my company. Now, the first question, which is the most important one to respond, is why do we communicate? And you may believe that this is quite an obvious question, but quite often it's difficult to articulate our questions, and I have come across my work throughout the world that those that provide me of interpretation services and translation services are quite useful when they do understand why I'm launching a press release, a campaign, or some communicate. And now, why is a campaign? It's to communicate, to sell, to inform, to sell more, to carry out an action, but it has to do with the tone, the register, and the structure of the message. It is the why. And I'm referring here not only to written and verbal communication, but also visual communication and body language. These questions are applicable to the whole spectrum of communication. The second question is, who do we communicate with? So I understand what I want to achieve, of course, and then second, who do we communicate with? There is a quote in England that says that, apologies for sending you such a long letter. I didn't have time to write a brief letter. The same philosophy is applicable to translation. The larger your audience, the simpler, clearer, and understandable should be your message. For example, this image. This image was at the beginning of a campaign in which I had the pleasure of working with in collaboration with UNAIDS. And we wanted to reach to the young people around the world for them to have the AIDS test. But the major question here is we knew what we wanted. We wanted the young people to have an AIDS test. We wanted to whom we wanted to communicate this message, young people around the world, basically in South Africa, where all of these official languages are spoken. And the next question that you have to consider is, how do we know if we have been successful? As I said at the beginning, my goal today is to leave in your mind these three questions. And this is the challenge for you. Is there a way of speaking to this computer? Do you think there would be any way in which we could know if the previous image, the previous campaign was successful or not? Is there really a way of knowing that I achieved this goal? This was our answer. We cannot measure in a communications campaign how many people had an HIV test after our campaign, but we were able to measure how many people would respond to this. And thanks to digital technologies and social networks, we were able to identify that this campaign moved people to act. That is 120,000 people participated within this campaign, so we're very pleased. And let me invite you to look for this Know Your HIV Status campaign, and then you can consider an expression that will move people to go through this test. And then finally, what else can I leave you with? Last year, we organized here in London the first seminar regarding global communications with the British chapter of the International Association of Business Communicators, IABC. And we were able to identify all of this information within these small images. And they are quite similar to what Claudia was sharing with you. And I will summarize this in 2 points. Number one, get to know yourself. Literally, we have to understand our own culture, our own nuances, is the main element in order to cross cultural boundaries. And the second point is focus on results. I think that this has moved my way of at managing global campaigns. For example, going to Brazil, Chile, or South Africa, and I want materials to look this way. I want the videos to contain a specific dialogue. So I went from this position to having conversation to the fact of, let's say, I want employees to respond this way to this ad, or we want to lower the accident indexes. So which channels and messages work best with your population to achieve our global outcomes and what we're really wanting to get? And let me also recommend the information used by get the data from the CIA and WEF. Now, the last question, we said that you're taking along 3 questions. Why do we communicate? To whom do we communicate? And how do we measure it? And this is just for you, an additional question. So what are we looking for when you are having an interpreter or a translator? I look for what we call in England a business partner, but this means time. It means to build up a relationship so you can understand my times, also my management, and the industry for which I work. The best investment that I have done in my previous position was to develop a glossary, a multilingual terminology book and guideline with the key words used by this organization. Because as you know, translation and interpretation, it doesn't go in a single direction. I mean, we did it once and it changed the translation process in itself. And I think I will leave you with this. y espero be able to see your questions and respond to the different challenges that you are facing and that you have in mind. Thank you. We thank Casilda, quite an interesting thing to work within a global campaign in South Africa where you're telling us that there are 13 official languages, and it's quite interesting because most surely those languages do not have nor the same level, and also the speakers of the different languages do not have the same opportunities nor the same purchasing power. So it's quite interesting to see how a campaign would be working. So I'll leave that for the Q&A session. I would also like to share with you a commercial partner or a business partner when you're doing your translations and your interpretations. I think that is critical. It is very important to establish a relationship with the interpreter or translator and the language organization and the client, because as a matter of fact, you can interpret the same message in the same language in 18 different ways for different languages. So it is quite important. So I do believe that the relationship between linguists, language experts, and the client is something that has to be developing little by little as a business partner. Let me now give the floor to Teresa Vankova. I thank Casilda, and we shall continue in the Q&A session. Please, if there are any questions, send us your questions, your comments with our chat system.
Hello, everyone. I'm not too sure whether you can hear me. So maybe can Gonzalo let me know? So anyway, I assume you can hear me. And hello, everyone. My name is Teresa Vankova, and I'm head of global communications of AMEC Foster Wheeler. Basically, when I was approached about this presentation, I was quite pleased, and I was thinking about it from two levels. One is personal, and one is business. Personally, I'm Czech. I'm a foreigner living in the UK for over 10 years. I'm a linguist, actually. I studied English and Spanish, and I speak other languages as well. And I come from a very small country. Being Czech, I don't anticipate anyone to learn Czech for me or for us. So for such a small nation, it is a necessity to learn at least one language, and preferably English or German, actually, in that specific country. I work in a multinational company with 40,000 people, based in or present in 55 countries. So you can imagine that presents some cultural and linguistic challenges, which I will talk about a little bit later, and how we address them or try to address them. And that's exactly the point. The question is that I will be asking, and I already know sort of the answer is, do we do enough for those people and who don't speak English, because English is our official language, although we employ many nationalities around the world, or should we be doing more? So what am I going to talk about? I looked at the subject a little bit broadly, because language, I think language is just a part of the whole concept of diversity and inclusion that we promote very much, that we want to have embedded firmly in our business. But diversity brings cultural and linguistic challenges. So I'm going to look at really briefly at cultural barriers in multicultural environment, and in language barriers in multilingual environment, because this is all what we have. But first, let me explain what we mean by diversity and inclusion. Yes. So this is our definition, basically. One more here. This is our definition in AMEC Foster Wheeler. So we think that obviously many people perceive still diversity as a matter of gender, which is not really true. There is much more to it. And as you can see, this is our definition. So it's a range of various differences, visible, invisible, that make people unique, special. But at the same time, you can have the diversity, but unless you create the inclusive environment where all these differences are valued, are recognized, respected, encouraged, then diversity doesn't make much sense, actually. And as you can see from the picture, I don't know if you can actually read it. You can see, there are 6 people and they look at the circle and each of them basically thinks it's something else or calls it in a different way. So why are we pushing it that much? Why are we promoting? Why is it important? Well, basically, it's we believe that greater diversity and inclusion brings benefits to both our people, to both our people and the company. It brings ideas, brings new perspectives, and that brings me to something that we call diversity of thought, which is those varied ideas, the ways of thinking, perspectives, because people come from different backgrounds. They went to different schools, they had different childhoods, lived in different countries, and so on, and all that shapes you. And this is something that we call diversity of thought, actually. So this is the concept that we promote very much. We're not there yet, I must say, but we are working on it. Obviously, with diversity, if you look at diversity and want to have diversity in your organization, then different cultures come in play. And diversity presents lots of challenges in terms of different cultures. And it's not just the language, it's behaviors. It's, as you can see, stereotypes. Because, you may assume things that, are not really actually true. You just think as you are like that, others are like that as well, which is not true. Then there is a bit that's called ethnocentrism, which is basically which is the tendency to judge others or other groups according to our own standards. So it is about being inclusive, about respecting our cultures, and so on. So how do we do it in AMEC Foster Wheeler in terms of languages? As I said, our official language is English. Having said that, we do hire people who don't speak English. And I'll give you an example. In Chile, for example, 90% of our population doesn't speak English at all. So how do we tackle that? What do we actually do? And I listed a few examples here, how we try to overcome. And I'm saying, we're not actually there yet. There are certain things which are obviously costly, so we can't afford to do all of them. It's just that volume is huge, but we're trying when we can to address that. So we do provide English learning opportunities. I don't know if you've ever heard about Plain English. It's actually a Plain English campaign, and it was established in 1979. And what it actually is, they've been campaigning against jargon and misleading documents and misleading writing, mainly in documents or materials produced by the government, by various authorities, and so on. But they work with a lot of businesses. We are lifelong members, and that entitles us to about 50 different courses focused on business writing for emails and websites, and grammar check, then writing reports as well. So it's quite useful, but 50, if you think about 40,000 people, is not enough. So we made a deal with them, or collaboration, that we get quite a large discount, and we offer this through our development platform that we call the Academy to our employees, those who actually need it. And we've had a huge interest, mainly from the Middle East, and also from countries such as China, for example, and some of South American countries, Chile, as I mentioned, Peru as well. But it's really great that we can offer that. We can't offer it to everyone, and not everyone is willing to do that. The courses are quite basic, and in a way, it can be also a refresher, basically, as opposed to learning something totally new. But it's in place. Then we translate, but we only select the documents because we've got so many. So we do translate, for example, Code of Business Conduct, Anti-Bribery and Corruption Training, and that we translate in our 11 approved languages. But if we have to translate, but there is no requirement, legal requirement, and any other, then we tend to do 2 languages only, which is Canadian French, that's by law, and then Spanish. Then we also try to use multilingual software, and I put 2 words there, OneSpace, which is our intranet, that's our digital workplace, as we call it, and then Yammer, some of you may know, the social collaboration platform. You can translate, so we can translate news in OneSpace and push it out there in different languages. At the moment, we've got 7, but we plan to have 11. And Yammer has a translation tool, so if someone posts something in Spanish, for example, you can just hit the button, translates into English. In some, depending what we communicate, we try to use both telling and showing visual methods of training, for example. We have some trainings that are very visually appealing and mainly visual. When we know we're going to target specific countries where, English proficiency is not that high. So we try that. And in general, as I'm head of communications, we try to communicate really clearly, efficiently, with no idioms, no jargon, so that it's no metaphors, so that it's really, really straightforward and clear. So that's what we do. Do we do enough? Probably not, but we do something, and we are definitely trying to do better and more. So thank you very much for your attention, and hopefully it was useful. Thank you.
I just wanted to share, and I'm going to go back into Spanish, so Carlos can translate into English. Que en México.
Was in the good governance agenda with President Fox and making clear language for the Mexican government, because one of the most important values of democracy is that citizens are able to understand what the government is saying. That's how I met Gonzalo, actually, in President Fox's administration. So I think that mainly the questions that you're sending are quite important, and I would like to see and hear how you're managing interpretations and the virtual work in many languages. So I wonder if you can give Teresa the floor so she can talk to us about how they manage their business meetings when they are held in different languages.
Well, if it's about business meetings, I must say that the majority of them are conducted in English, but I know that in some countries, when it's necessary, we use our own people. We don't hire a professional interpreter for those meetings, so we use someone who is proficient in English or in the language that the meeting is conducted in, and and then that person actually helps to translate. But because I believe that it would be really costly, I think, for us. But so we try to help ourselves with our own resources. There was another question, actually, if I may answer, written.
The floor to Teresa, because she was going to answer a second question. My apologies.
that's all right. Sorry. No, I just saw the other question. Yeah, we've got two sort of official company languages, but as I'm saying, we don't translate everything into those two. But if you look at our website, there are portions of English and Spanish and obviously French. But how does that impact recruitment? I mean, our official language is actually English. So I know that we advertise jobs in English, but that's high level. That's on our careers website. But I know that on a more local level, very often what happens is that they take the roles or they have the job descriptions and they translate those themselves. And particularly when they advertise that locally, because sometimes we run some campaigns in specific regions when we're looking for specific skills and expertise. So again, it's very local and regional, and there is no global approach to recruitment to, just by default have it in 3 languages actually. Thank you.
I thank Teresa. I do not know exactly what I missed. I lost my internet connection. I am back. And well, there are some points where you are all in agreement. Casilda was in charge of the plain English and plain language program that was adopted, which was brought in a project with President Fox, and we worked together, as a matter of fact, there. I have some additional questions. In what language are you conveying a message with an economic or social interest? Is this very costly? So really, when we see people with lower income, multilingualism is helpful for them, or is it going against them? Are there tools to support them, or are these just economic interests in the multilingual environment? Another question, and here I will wait for you to ask for the floor. And are the translation tools such as Google Translate, are they useful? We know they have their problems, or do you believe that they end up working against you actually? Are they useful? I think that is the case. But if they work against you, well, I don't think that is the case, but we should know where to use them. But I would like to hear your opinion in this regard. There's another question for Claudia. What is the advice of Claudia when there are not so many open positions and not so much use for foreign languages? And another question for all of you. Do you consider it's important to identify the different variants of the same language? Are we placing it in the American English and the South African English and the British English or Canadian English? How should we place our message? So, Claudia, the floor is yours. Having some problem with Claudia's microphone. Let me see if someone else is. Casilda has requested the floor, so let's give it to her. Now, when it has to do with how to use a dialect in different regions, I have 2 experiences that could illustrate this concept. In the company where I currently work, most of our communications in Spanish are directed to Chile and Peru. and I clearly can write in Spanish, but I always ask a Chilean to check our Spanish, because basically with press releases that have financial info, or with the argot in the mining industry, it is not the same what we use in Mexico or in Chile. Now, in regards to English, you make a statement, a political statement. And when I was working in the International Mining Chamber, an international body, we were located in London, but we intentionally selected the United Nations English for all our communication processes, because we wanted to communicate that we are a global organization, though we were based in London. On the other hand, the World Bank, the style is American style of English, because they're located in English, and the company that I work with now, the English that we use for all our official documents is British English. That's our style, though the local communicates where the basic audience will be Canadian or American, at those points we choose to use American English or Canadian English, which is quite similar. And basically there are different geographies where communication is legislated. For example, in Canada, everything has to be published in English and French. And in South Africa, of the 11 languages spoken in South Africa, it's 11, not 13, I'm sorry. But not all dialects are written languages or dialects. But it's quite impressive to see how everyone in South Africa, even in rural areas, in the poor areas, at least they speak 2 dialects, and that is something that enriches their lives, in my personal opinion. Thank you so much. In the same order that you took the floor, what Casilda just said is quite interesting. I mean, many of these languages are not written. It is like translating some of the indigenous languages in Mexico and put them into written language. I mean, we use the Latin dictionary alphabet here, but that's another issue. Let me give the floor to each of you for your final comments. So, Claudia, you take the floor first.
Thank you, Gonzalo, and sorry about the microphone before. I just wanted to go back quickly to a question you asked before concerning Google Translates and these online automatic tools that are today available. Your question was whether they work with us or against us. I personally think that they have definitely developed a lot, and they're much more sophisticated today than they were 10 years ago, but they can certainly be of help as a basis, as a start of any translation project, but they can never ever in any way substitute the nuances and the richness and the cultural context that a human can and a professional translator can provide. So personally, we happen to use them sometimes when for really basic project, but we always have we also have an internal translation department that follows up and with professional translators. That's my personal experience with that. And then there was a question from Casilda in terms of what's the relationship between gender and multilingualism. So today, there's a lot of research that has been done, and it is available and it's known on the brain. And as we know, the female brain and the male brain is not exactly the same. And it's actually proven that women, they are slightly more prone and better at learning languages. It's easier. We speak earlier on average, of course, not in absolute terms, but like, you know, when we look at average research available, women speak earlier, and we have an easier time at learning languages. So this is something which is based on, you know, research available. Back to Gonzalo, I guess.
I thank Claudia. Well, I think that I totally agree with you. I think the machines will never replace human beings, and nor interpreters nor translators. But of course, interpreters and translators that will learn how to use technological tools like the one that we're using today will really replace those that do not know how to use it. Let me now give the floor to Teresa for her final comments. Thank you very much. Bueno.
All right. Well, I think I have maybe two things. Again, picking up on what Claudia and Casilda said, actually. So it's really strange because my business is originally British, but we've grown by acquisition over the years. Our language is English, it's British English. So we do correct American English, for example. When I was working for DHL in Prague, DHL, although acquired by Deutsche Post, they were pushing out their American English. So I was correcting all English writing into American English on the other way, because that was just in the guidelines and that was historic. And when I joined, it was the way it was, actually. So, and for the automated translation, I fully agree with Gonzalo, because I used to be a translator as well, and they are helpful to get the meaning, to get the gist of the story, but at the same time, it can never be as rich. Our tools, when we have our intranet, that we can publish news in other languages, on the language is pulled from Bing, which is, I would say, similar to Google, and it's not perfect at all. So what we do in case of important messages, we send it to Chile, and they proofread and they actually correct. And going back to the what Casilda said about having her press releases checked by the Chilean office, we've been told that the Chilean version of Spanish is the most widely understood in Latin America. So when we try to translate something to be understandable within Latin America, we should always go for the Chilean Spanish. Not sure whether that's true, but we are basically following that rule. So thank you very much.
Well, I thank our three speakers. We are so pleased to end up this presentation speaking well of translators. Tomorrow is the International Translators Day, so let me end this presentation congratulating you, thanking you, and thanking our speakers. And I thank you so much, and I'll see you next time.